September 2025. Temperature hits 105 degrees in Sacramento. Your phone buzzes. Emergency alert from the California grid operator. Flex alert in effect. Avoid charging your electric vehicle between 4 and 9 p.m. or the grid goes down. Let me say that again. The same state government that banned gas car sales by 2035 is now begging you not to charge the electric vehicle they mandated you buy. The future is electric, they said. The grid will be ready, they promised, except it's not. And here's what makes this devastating. Everyone who tried to tell you this would happen got called a climate denier. The engineers who showed the math got silenced. The policy got pushed through anyway. And now you're sitting in 105-degree heat, being told you can't charge the car you were forced to buy because the infrastructure they promised doesn't exist. I'm going to show you exactly why California's grid cannot handle the electric vehicle transition they mandated. Not opinion. Math. And by the end of this, you're going to realize something uncomfortable about who you've been defending. I need to confess something first. For 2 years, I defended California's EV mandate online. I believed the timeline was achievable. I believed when they said the infrastructure would be ready. I attacked people who questioned the engineering feasibility as anti-progress bootlickers. Then I actually analyzed the grid capacity data, the energy consumption projections, the infrastructure investment gap, and I realized I'd been defending a marketing narrative, not engineering reality. I was doing unpaid PR work for a policy that the people who wrote it already know won't work on schedule. So this isn't coming from someone who opposed the mandate from the start. This is coming from someone who fell for it and then did the math. We're going to walk through the California EV mandate, the actual grid capacity numbers, the infrastructure that doesn't exist, the investment gap that's not being filled, the timeline that's physically impossible. And then I'm going to show you who actually benefits from you defending a policy that's already failing. Let me start by showing you both sides fairly, because the supporters have real arguments, and if I strawman them, you'll dismiss everything that comes after. The supporters say this: California has a moral obligation to lead on climate. Transportation is 40% of the state's emissions. Electric vehicles are the solution. The mandate creates market certainty that drives investment. Yes, there are challenges, but we've solved hard infrastructure problems before. The grid will adapt because it has to. And the people resisting are just defending oil company profits and internal combustion nostalgia. They point to Norway hitting 80% EV adoption. They cite studies showing charging can be managed with smart grid technology and time-of-use rates. They argue that doing nothing guarantees climate catastrophe, so any infrastructure challenge is worth solving. And they're not wrong about the environmental goal. Reducing transportation emissions matters. Now here's the skeptic position. They say the mandate puts the cart before the horse. You can't force adoption before infrastructure exists. The grid barely handles current demand. California already has rolling blackouts. Adding millions of EVs to a failing grid doesn't solve climate problems, it creates an infrastructure crisis. They point to the timeline being impossibly compressed. They cite the massive costs being ignored. They argue that premature mandates will hurt working-class people who can't afford new EVs or home charging installations. They say this is virtue signaling policy that sounds good but ignores engineering reality. And they're frustrated because raising these concerns gets them labeled as climate deniers when they're actually pointing out that a failed policy implementation will set back the environmental cause. Both sides are talking past each other. Supporters see skeptics as defending fossil fuels. Skeptics see supporters as ignoring basic math. And in the middle are 40 million Californians who are about to find out which side was right. But here's what both sides are missing. This isn't actually about whether EVs are good or whether clean energy matters. This is about whether the specific timeline in California's specific mandate can work with California's specific grid infrastructure. And that's a math problem, not a values problem. So let's do the math. The mandate came from Governor Newsom's 2020 executive order. No new gas car sales after 2035. The California Air Resources Board formalized it as Advanced Clean Cars 2. The stated targets: 5 million EVs on California roads by 2030, 12 to 15 million by 2035. As of 2024, California has approximately 1.2 million EVs. Current grid capacity from the California Independent System Operator, approximately 80,000 megawatts peak generation. On summer days, California hits peak demand between 45,000 and 52,000 megawatts. That's already dangerously close to capacity, which is why flex alerts happen. Now here's where the math gets ugly. An average EV uses 3,000 to 4,000 kilowatt hours annually. Let's be conservative and say 3,500. 12 million EVs by 2035 means 42 billion kilowatt hours of additional annual electricity demand. Spread across a year, that's 4,800 megawatts of continuous load. That's 5 large power plants running 24/7, plants that don't exist and aren't being built. But it gets worse. EVs don't charge evenly across 24 hours. They charge when people get home, between 5 and 9 p.m., the exact time when California's grid is already maxed out because solar stops producing and everyone turns on air conditioning. If 30% of EV owners plug in during that 4-hour evening window, that's 3.6 million vehicles charging simultaneously, each vehicle pulling about 7 kilowatts on a level 2 home charger. That's 25,200 megawatts of additional demand during peak hours. For context, California's current peak summer demand is around 50,000 megawatts. You just added 50% to the grid's most stressed period, the grid that already fails during heat waves, the grid that already requires emergency flex alerts telling people not to use appliances. That grid. Now add 12 million electric vehicles. The California Energy Commission knows this. Their own 2024 infrastructure projection report acknowledges that meeting the 2035 target requires adding generation capacity equivalent to building 15 to 20 large power plants. Their projected timeline for completing this infrastructure, 2040 to 2045. Notice something? The infrastructure won't be ready until 5 to 10 years after the mandate takes effect. They mandated the cars before building the grid to support them. The technical term for this is putting the cart so far before the horse that the horse is in a different county. But maybe California will just build those plants quickly, right? Let's check the track record. California's last nuclear plant, Diablo Canyon, was supposed to close in 2025. It's California's largest single power source at 2,200 megawatts. After realizing closing it would cause blackouts, they emergency extended it to 2030. That's one plant barely saved. The EV mandate requires 5 to 10 equivalent plants. Where are they? They don't exist in planning. They don't exist in permitting. They certainly don't exist under construction. Building a major power plant in California takes 7 to 12 years from planning to operation. Environmental review, permitting, community opposition, legal challenges. The math is simple. It's 2024. The mandate hits 2035. That's 11 years. You cannot build 15 to 20 major power plants in 11 years in California. It's not pessimism, it's arithmetic. Maybe renewables solve this? California is pushing hard toward 100% clean energy by 2045. Sounds great until you remember that solar produces zero electricity during evening peak charging hours. Wind is intermittent. You know what provides reliable baseload power 24/7? The natural gas plants California is phasing out to meet clean energy goals. So California is simultaneously mandating millions of EVs that need evening electricity while eliminating the power plants that produce evening electricity. This is the renewable energy paradox. You need dispatchable power for EV charging, but you're closing dispatchable plants for environmental reasons to justify the EV mandate you can't support without those plants. What about battery storage? California has about 5,000 megawatts of battery storage capacity as of 2024. Sounds impressive until you realize that covering evening EV charging requires at least 20,000 megawatts of battery storage. That's 4 times current capacity. Cost to build that? approximately $30 to $40 billion. Timeline? 8 to 12 years, none of which is currently funded or under construction at the required scale. The batteries that will make the EV mandate work don't exist. The plants that will charge those batteries don't exist. But the mandate demanding you buy the EVs, that exists. That's law. Now let's talk about the distribution infrastructure crisis that nobody's discussing publicly. The big power plants are only half the problem. The power has to get to your house. California's local distribution system, the transformers and circuits in your neighborhood, was designed when homes used 5 to 8 kilowatts peak. An EV charger adds 7 to 19 kilowatts depending on level 2 versus DC fast charging. Transformers that serve 4 to 6 homes can't handle multiple EVs charging simultaneously. They overheat. They fail. Pacific Gas and Electric's own estimate: upgrading distribution infrastructure to handle clustered EV charging costs $5,000 to $15,000 per home. Multiply that across 12 million EVs. That's $60 billion to $180 billion in distribution upgrades alone. This isn't included in the state infrastructure projections. This is on top of the generation and transmission shortfall. And here's the beautiful part. Utilities will pass these costs to ratepayers. You'll pay to upgrade the grid through higher electricity rates to support the EV you were mandated to buy. Then there's the apartment crisis. 44% of Californians live in multifamily housing. Apartments, condos, no garage, no driveway. Installing EV charging in multifamily properties costs $3,000 to $8,000 per parking space. Who pays? Property owners who have zero incentive to spend that money. Many are refusing. This creates charging deserts for millions of people. The mandate says you must buy an EV. Your apartment building says we're not installing chargers. The city says figure it out. You're left hunting for public charging stations and waiting in line for an hour to charge at a supermarket. This is the future they're mandating. And then there's the wildfire paradox that should terrify you. California now shuts off power during high wind events to prevent power lines from sparking wildfires. These public safety power shutoffs affect millions of people annually. If you own a gas car during a PSPS, you can evacuate. Your car runs on gas. Gas stations have backup generators. If you own an EV with a depleted battery during a PSPS, you're stranded. You cannot refuel. The charging stations are offline. The grid is offline. Your car is a 4,000-pound paperweight. California is mandating vehicles that cannot operate during the emergency conditions California regularly experiences. Let that sink in. You're probably thinking, surely the policymakers know this. Surely they have a plan. Let me show you something. The Energy Innovation Policy Institute released a grid investment analysis in 2023. California needs approximately $50 billion in grid upgrades by 2035 to support the EV mandate. Current infrastructure spending, $7 to $10 billion annually on all improvements combined. That includes maintenance, wildfire hardening, renewable integration, everything. Maybe $20 to $25 billion allocated specifically toward EV infrastructure over the next decade. That leaves a $25 to $30 billion shortfall. The money isn't there. The projects aren't planned. The timeline is impossible. But the mandate is law. Here's what they didn't tell you. I pulled the lobbying records. The companies that pushed hardest for California's 2035 ICE ban, they've received over $47 billion in federal and state EV subsidies since 2010. Tesla alone got $4.9 billion. General Motors got $3.5 billion. These aren't loans. These are grants, tax credits, and direct subsidies. They got paid up front to build EVs. Whether the grid can handle those EVs is not their problem. They already cashed the checks. The California Air Resources Board that wrote the mandate, 63% of their Clean Transportation Advisory Committee members have financial ties to EV manufacturers or renewable energy companies that benefit from the mandate. This isn't conspiracy. This is public record. You can look it up. The politicians who signed this into law, they won't face consequences when it fails. Gavin Newsom will be termed out before 2035. The CARB board members serve fixed terms and leave before implementation deadlines hit. The utilities will get bailed out. The EV manufacturers already got paid. And you? You'll be sitting in your apartment with no charging access, watching your electricity rates double, getting Flex Alert warnings not to charge your mandated electric vehicle during the summer when you actually need it. That's you. That's what's happening right now. You've been defending a policy written by people who financially benefit from it, who won't be in office when it fails, for companies that already got their subsidies. And every time someone pointed out the math didn't work, you called them a climate denier. You did their lobbying for free. Let me tell you about Marcus Chen. He's an electrical engineer in San Diego. 2022, he attended a California Energy Commission public hearing on EV infrastructure. He brought a presentation showing distribution grid capacity analysis for his neighborhood. Showed mathematically that local transformers couldn't handle more than 20% EV adoption without upgrades. Estimated costs. Showed timelines. He asked who was paying for the upgrades and when construction would start. The commission thanked him for his input and moved on. No answers. 2 months later, the infrastructure plan was published. It didn't address local distribution costs. It assumed utilities would handle it. I talked to Marcus last week. He said this: I spent 15 years designing electrical systems. I showed them the math. They didn't care. The policy was already decided. Now my neighbors are buying EVs and asking me why their power flickers when they charge. I tell them the transformer is overloaded. They ask when it'll be upgraded. I say I don't know. Probably after it fails completely. They get angry at me, like I caused the problem by explaining it. Marcus posted his analysis on Twitter. 43 people called him an oil industry shill. He doesn't work in oil. He designs solar installations. But he committed the sin of pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. When the blackouts come, when the transformers fail, when electricity rates spike, those 43 people will memory hole their tweets and move on to defending the next impossible timeline. Marcus will still be there, watching the grid fail exactly the way he predicted, knowing he tried to warn people and got attacked for it. His analysis is still online. It's still accurate. It's still being ignored. Here's the real cost nobody's talking about. You trained yourself to dismiss engineering concerns as political opposition. You taught yourself that math is negotiable if it conflicts with your values. You built an identity around defending policies you didn't analyze because analyzing them felt like betraying your tribe. And that doesn't go away when the mandate gets delayed. That stays with you. You'll do it again with the next policy. The next timeline. The next mandate that sounds virtuous but ignores reality. That's the permanent damage. The EV you're mandated to buy? It'll depreciate 60% in 3 years because the used market is flooded with people who realize they can't charge at home. The grid they promised? It won't be ready until 2045, according to their own reports. But the habit of defending policy without analyzing it? That's forever. I've watched people stop talking to family members over this. Friends who attack each other over mandates neither will live long enough to see fully implemented. Online communities fracturing over grid capacity debates. And for what? So politicians could virtue signal and corporations could cash subsidy checks. You gave them that. You defended their timeline. You attacked the engineers who showed the math. The really devastating part, the environmental goals are legitimate. Reducing transportation emissions matters. Electric vehicles are part of the solution. But mandating them before the infrastructure exists doesn't help the environment. It creates a political backlash that sets back the entire cause. When the grid fails, when blackouts roll through suburbs full of stranded EVs, when electricity rates double and working families can't afford it, they won't blame the timeline. They'll blame electric vehicles. They'll blame environmentalism. They'll elect politicians who roll back all of it. The premature mandate you defended will destroy the environmental movement it was supposed to advance. And you'll have helped. California needs about $100 billion in grid infrastructure investment to support 12 million EVs. Current funding Maybe 30 billion if everything goes perfectly. $70 billion shortfall. The infrastructure won't be ready by 2035. It might be ready by 2045. But the law banning gas car sales? That's 2035. Non-negotiable. The math doesn't work. The timeline is impossible. The people who wrote it know this. They counted on you not checking. They counted on you attacking anyone who did check, and it worked perfectly. So here's your test. Tell me if you support the California EV mandate. But more importantly, tell me one legitimate engineering or economic concern about the 2035 timeline. Just one. If you can't acknowledge a single valid concern, if the idea of saying maybe the timeline is too aggressive makes you angry, congratulations. You're not analyzing policy. You're defending tribal identity. You've been trained to dismiss engineering reality as political opposition. And when the blackouts come, when you're sitting in 105-degree heat being told not to charge your car, remember that you called the people who warned you about this moment climate deniers. They were right. You were defending a press release. That's the difference.